Thank you so much for tuning into today's Senior Housing Officer Virtual Roundtable put on by ACUOI. My name is Spencer Giese. I'm a Research Educational Specialist, and I will also be your Technical Director for today's session. Some topics we hope to cover today: isolation housing experiences, student engagement practices, as well as topics that you all submit through our Q&A function. As we always like to highlight, ACUOI has a number of outstanding resources and ways for you to be connecting with the field currently. Our online community continues to have outstanding information and practices shared by one another in the field. We have all of our virtual roundtable recordings on our YouTube channel, so if you missed an episode and you want to catch up, please take a look at that. And of course, we have our COVID-19 resources page that's dedicated to helping you all on your campuses. Another note I'd like to point out is that registration is open for the ACUOI October Conference Series. Those conferences are the Academic Initiatives Conference, the Business Operations Conference, and the APA Housing Facilities Conference. New this year, we have Team All Access Passes. So as a college or university member of ACUOI, you're actually able to purchase at one price access for all of your staff members to attend either a specific conference or all three of the conferences. So take a look at those registration options, really trying to provide access for our members to be able to still receive professional development resources during these COVID-19 times. We are joined by an outstanding panel and moderator today, and we'll hear a bit more from them shortly. But first, I just want to point out how the best ways to engage are with our session today. Again, we want this to be a conversation with our panelists and our moderator, and you all have the ability to help guide those conversations through submitting topics in our Q&A menu. And if you do put something in the Q&A, we'd love to hear who you are so we can better contact you. So, name, institution. That's a great way to share with not only our panelists, but the audience. Items that are put in the Q&A are visible to both audience and our panel. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to Pam Schreiber as our moderator today. And thank you all for joining us and being a part of our session. Pam.
Thank you, Spencer, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's really my pleasure to serve as the moderator for today's roundtable. I serve the University of Washington as an AVP and Executive Director of Housing and Food Services. And I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get started. So, Larry?
Larry Christensen, Georgia College. To put that into perspective, we are about 90 minutes southeast of Atlanta, 30 minutes due east of Macon, a campus of approximately 7,000 students.
Alma, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alma Saline. I am the Executive Director of University Housing at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
And I'm Antonio P. I serve as Director of Residential Life here at the University of Houston.
Great, thank you all. We're going to get started by having each of the panelists tell a little bit about their situation. So they're going to respond to the question, what does this week look like on your campus? And the goal here is to give you, the listener and participant, some perspective so that as our panelists share their experiences and points of view, you have some context in which to place those comments. So I'm going to start with Alma and have her answer that question. And then we'll go to Larry next and then Antonio.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. In the residence halls, we have about a 62% occupancy. And so we budgeted at 97%. So I'm sure that many of you can feel that particular pain that we are feeling. We have about 119 students in isolation and 28 students in quarantine. We have about 450 beds available for that. And I am, our positivity rate within university housing is at 2.1%. Last week, our chancellor sent a message that he was telling students that basically giving them a stay-at-home order, except for going to the dining halls and going to class and doing essential work. So we are in the midst of that stay-at-home order. It will end on September 16th. We had a surge of cases last week, and so we also made a decision to relocate students in 2 of our residence halls that had very low occupancy to be able to have those spaces available if we should need it in our response to COVID-19 in the future. So that is what is happening on our campus this week.
For Georgia College, a little bit different story. We opened August 1st unofficially for our sorority recruitment. So basically by August 2nd, we had in excess of 800 students already on campus, all females going through the recruitment process. Our official first class day was the 12th of August. As predicted, and for many of you who've been watching the news, we were one of the first to open, so we were one of the first to get attention. A small little school in central Georgia ends up making not just national, but international. We did the New York Times, the Washington Post, Inside Higher Ed, Chronicle of Higher Education. All of them were coming to our doorstep wanting the story. We for a good 14 to 18 days were really taking it. Our numbers on campus reached over 600, and our numbers in the residence halls of positive cases exceeded 200 at that point. For the last, I would say, 2 weeks, we have definitely leveled off. While the numbers continue to slide in a downward fashion off campus, they have all but almost dropped off on campus. We made a decision very early on in basically June, that as we would do with the flu, we would do with COVID. So we have no on-campus quarantine. We have a very small reserve spaces set aside in the event of an international student or a student from out of state. But we're fortunate in the sense that most of our population is regional. So our order is for the student in 3 categories: tested positive, interacted with somebody positive, or showing symptoms. They are to go home and quarantine. That meant at one point we were broaching 30% of our students were sent home. Most of those students are now back on campus, and I think while it was certainly painful at the time, I think the students very quickly, and their parents for that matter, very, very quickly learned that this mask thing is no joke. And as soon as they figured that out, our numbers have consistently remained low. We hope to keep it that way. I do anticipate after this last weekend another surge, another 10 to 14 days out after Labor Day when some of our students left campus, but we will have to wait and see how that goes.
And the situation here at the University of Houston, we opened on August 14th. We are at about 35% occupancy. We budget at 96% occupancy. We've got about 5,500 beds on the campus proper. 102 beds we've designated as quarantine beds, and our numbers are very, very low. We have not experienced the massive spike that others have, but I think that's given some of the restraints that have been here at the city. We also the students had to opt into face-to-face classes. All classes are scheduled online, and only about 15% of those are face-to-face on the campus proper, and those are labs that students have to take, very few other courses in those numbers. We too anticipate that we will have an uptick of cases after this holiday break, as I'm starting to see the numbers trickle in a little, but right now we're maintaining, and knock on all of the woods and all of the positive vibes that things stay that way. But we too are prepared if our numbers spike, as others have seen as well.
Antonio, before we move on, there's a question in the question box asking if you would repeat your occupancy stats. So as long as we're right on that, could you say that again, please?
Yeah, we're at about 35% of occupancy of about 5,500 beds.
Great.
And I was a little bit remiss. The state of Georgia made it clear for our systems office that we would be at full capacity. So we opened at 96%. We've now dropped to 93%, but we plan on pretty much staying for the rest of the semester stable at that 90+%.
Okay. So thank you. We're going to get back to some more specifics about isolation housing here in just a few minutes, because it was a popular topic that participants indicated when they registered for today. So stay tuned. Before we move to that, I want to ask our panelists two other general questions. So for the first, Antonio, we'll start with you. What about this situation has been most surprising to you?
I think what's not surprising about COVID-19? I think I think the most surprising is how long. No one knew that this was going to last as long as it did, right? I think from the early reports, the initial feelings was this is something and we would get through it. And I think as we wrap our heads around how long this situation will be and when will we begin moving towards a place of normalcy, and I say that as very relative, right? We grapple with that, and I think that's where my mind is now. The most surprising thing is we're now 6 months, past March, when everyone began making some very hard decisions about our organizations and how we are managing our housing. We're here, and so that's the surprising thing. Is there an end? Can I predict that? No, you can't. And there's a different way you need to move every day. So that's probably the most surprising piece.
Thanks, Antonio. You've probably hit that for all of us. But I'm still going to ask Alma, what about this has been most surprising?
I think it's the nature of the constant state of pivoting. And for all the planning that we do, and for as much as we thought we were ready when we opened the halls and we were going to follow a particular path, that the same amount of pivoting we have been required to do in the planning stages is what we've been required to do in the implementation stage. And that has just added a whole layer of stress and anxiety. Our staff are exhausted, like all of your staffs are exhausted, and trying to find ways in which we can give them space and time so that they can come back to their work and give as much as they can for the experiences that we have now. So that's what's been the most surprising in the implementation process.
Great, thanks, Alma. Larry, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned, as they've already said. But I think, for years we've been hearing that the future of a college may be without walls and maybe online. And the passion and the desire that both parents and students have to be back physically on campus certainly has spoken loud and clear. And I would say the second one, not so much surprising, but disappointing, especially here, I have to just say in the South. How a health issue has become political issue. I expected it, but I did not expect it at the same level that I saw on move-in day. Now, when the parents went home, things calmed down and changed a little bit, but that did catch me a little bit off guard.
Yeah, I really appreciate your responses, all of you. I think that, again, Antonio, I think you hit the number one surprise. I think this idea of how we will be different after this is over is something that, I hear people talk a lot about, and we have certainly heard people say, well, we're not going to go back to normal, right? Because we're not going to go fully back. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's likely true. But I think, Alma, to your point, in terms of how our organizations function, I mean, we may have found some, strengths that we didn't know we had. We may also find some ways of operating that we hadn't considered before, but we have been forced into. And, Larry, I think your point about how, we have responded to this situation and how it has become politicized, I think that helps us to think about things going forward, whereas we may not have thought certain issues in regard to our programs would be sort of hot buttons, maybe in fact, this will help us think differently about some of those things as well, because yeah, I'm with you. I mean, who'd have thunk, a public health issue would have sort of created this situation where people have to take a stand, if you will. So pretty interesting. I want to ask one more question, really closely tied to the first one, and then we're going to again talk more about some isolation housing and student engagement. But if you had to, let's say it's, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, and you're at your retirement party, and you're asked, what was the lesson that you learned, working through the pandemic? What would you respond? What's the number one lesson learned so far? Alma, thank you. Please go first.
I think for me, it is the continued investment of our staff with their grit and determination to respond to a crisis. Housing folks are operational gurus. That is one thing that I have learned from this crisis, is that we are the operational gurus. And if we are not consulted about the impact of the operation and for the residential students, then there are pieces that are missing in the overall university response. And so I actually had one of our staff members do some comparison of the pandemic of 1918 and our pandemic now. And there are lots of similarities. I mean, the politicalization of the virus required masks, required hand washing, required physical distancing. But the one thing that stood out was that the courage that individuals brought to the situation to get through the situation, and the kindness that was shared with people to be successful. And so I think that continues to be the message for me today. We have challenged ourselves to think differently, and I think we've successfully done that, and I think we've led the way in doing that.
Thanks, Alma. That's so inspirational. So I'm sure your team is feeling really good, just hearing that kind of feedback from you. So really great. Antonio, do you want to speak to that? What's your so far greatest lesson learned?
I don't know if there's a greatest one. I've learned so many lessons, but I think from my AVP, I think for those of you who've been in the field much longer than I, and you've seen waves of things, positioning our organizations financially to weather a storm, and to be able not only to take care of property, but to ensure the livelihood of your team and your students, right, remains viable. That has been the greatest lesson learned. And I think I go back and lean on my business training is, how do we position our organizations to take on whatever challenges are coming before us? And so as we've had conversations about the many other challenges that have faced the organization, prior to my getting here, that begins to be my question forward. How do you position your team to take that on? I know we had made a number of decisions in my learning the 10 years prior to set us up to where we were. And had it not been for some reserves, right, and some well thought out intentional decisions, we may have been one of the ones who shuttered, and I know that has happened to some of our colleagues, many of them. But I think that has been the greatest lesson learned, is to, as much as it is about the engagement piece, you've got to be really keen on the financial positioning to get you to the next place that you want to go to.
Terrific advice. So Larry, you and I have been in the field probably about the same amount of time, and I'm going to surmise that you have never seen anything like this, because I certainly haven't. What's going to be your takeaway from this?
Well, a couple of things. you're right in the sense of those who have been in the field a little bit longer have seen change. Technology when we entered the field was probably a calculator. Ooh, and I would say that technology area is one that we continue to need to focus and invest on. There's a number of things that have been real savers for us with technology. Just accountability of figuring out who's here, who's not here, who's coming back, what date are they allowed to, and so forth. The accountability measures, the making sure that the halls were up to speed so that they could handle the online classes and so forth. So continuing to invest in technology, I think, is a lesson that I have learned on this. The other one is when I talked to the staff this fall and they came back, I said, it's kind of strange. I'm a little bit envious in some ways of this freshman group this year because they are entering in at a unique time, and they'd say, well, what are you talking about? And I said, almost 40 years ago, 35, 40 years ago, I was sitting as an RA in a room being trained for staff training. And our issue that we were addressing at the time was AIDS. And people would say, well, there's no correlation. Oh, there certainly is. The mystery and the unknowns were in place, and the scare and the fear was there. And, back then we didn't have the technologies of being able to keep interacting with each other, to be able to communicate. I think that while they may be distanced, some would say isolated, but I prefer, distanced, they're still interacting. They've got ways to interact. And, in our days, a friend meant something different than social networking. And the word friend now is literally somebody I may never have met through technology, but I still have that ability to create that relationship and that community without the contact.
Great. Thank you so much. All of you have given us some really interesting things to think about. And I appreciate that. As we talked a few minutes ago, I like taking the opportunity to reflect in situations like that because it can inform our work today and in the future. So thanks for that. Let's get down to some brass tacks though right now and talk a little bit more operational. There were a lot of questions about isolation housing that were submitted by folks who were registering for today's roundtable. So I want to try to address some of those questions. If each of you could tell us a little bit more, and some of you spoke about this already, but a little bit more about your isolation housing. In particular, what method have you applied, if you will? And it sounds like we've got a variation between the three of you. How is it going? And if you could do a restart, what are some pieces of advice or things you might give others in regard to isolation housing? Let's see, Larry, I'm going to call on you first. You talked more than anyone else, I think, about your isolation housing so far. So is there anything more that you want to add to that?
Well, again, we made the decision not to isolate on campus, given the fact that we were at near 100% occupancy now in the mid to high 90s. That number doesn't really allow for us to have another place to go. So our decision is like I said, we would treat it like our normal flu season, where we encourage the student to go home. We sent larger groups of people home as a result of it. That works for us. I could see a campus that has a broader audience from a wider distance away from campus, that being, very, very difficult. But we have a combination of face-to-face and online learning, but 100% of it is on campus. So there is no from home online learning opportunity. For those students who are being sent home for quarantine, the onus is really turned to the faculty. They're teaching live to the students in the classroom face-to-face, and at the same time, they are opening up screens to allow people to remote in so they don't miss out on it while they are in quarantine from a distance.
Larry, Dr. Fauci has recently said to colleges and universities, don't send your students home. Have you gotten any pushback on that approach that you've taken?
We live in Georgia.
Tell us what that means. For those who aren't familiar, tell us what that means.
I mean, the state of Georgia basically opened up before our president suggested that it was safe to do so. So our governor and our board of regents and our chancellor have basically said face-to-face is the method that we're going to go into. And yes, there is that risk of higher transmission of COVID, and those numbers certainly have reflected in this state. But at the same point, I can't imagine, I think it's partly cultural too, I can't imagine being in the state of Georgia and having the concerns that parents are expressing, the interactions that they're wanting to have with their student when they're sick, if they are being quarantined on campus. So again, I think regionally and geographically, it's the right answer. And I think, you know, the comment from Fauci is, you know, don't bring them all back to campus, get them all sick at one time and then send them all home. Ours was a phased approach. As they got sick, we sent them home. So I think there's a difference in the perspective of the language that was being used as well.
Great, thanks, Larry. And please don't, you know, I'm not trying to be CNN or anything, but just had to bring that up because I thought that was interesting. Antonio, I want to go to you next, and I want to share with you a specific question that was posted. You mentioned constraints put in place that have aided your process with low or no case counts. Was there something specific in housing or on campus beyond the opt-in to campus that impacted that, or was that related to that?
I think these were self-decisions from students. Houston's numbers were the 4th highest in the nation. Our mayor is on TV every day reminding the city. He has a shame list that he is sharing with businesses. And so I think seeing several businesses on the shame list created some political storm here in the city. But as those numbers remain very high, I think people just decided that remaining on campus was not in them. We saw, a 50% drop in a month in our numbers. Just imagine how, we spent all of June planning, and then in July, again, pivot, right? The word of the season, going in a different direction with those. Texas too, I think the other thing that helped was the mask mandate in Texas, like Georgia. We have our own politics. People believe in coronavirus or they don't. And if you're coming into the city of Houston, you had to wear it. And the accommodation for folks who do not want to wear a mask is to stay away from the campus. And I think that may have helped some people make the decision, but nothing, the main factor was the opt-in. Going online with the opt-in to campus helped to keep those numbers pretty low. In the city now, the numbers are dropping, so I am hopeful for our future. Again, I'll go back to, we have about 102 beds on campus. Given our capacity, we've been able to identify 2 buildings specifically that we would isolate in, but we also have beds throughout the campus, just because we have different bed types, right? We want to keep students, don't want to disrupt them too much from their space. We manage these every day in coordination with our Office of Emergency Management. So we have a 10:30 meeting every day. We talk about every student who's in isolation. What updates do we need to make to process? What communications do we need to make with partners across the campus? And we've been fine tuning. So we've been doing this meeting since March. And when we started the new academic year, we made it a daily meeting. And so that has helped us to audit our system daily, make sure we understand what's happening with the students. We do a check-in with the student every day. Our residence life staff does. So we know how they're doing. We know what they need. We know if they're needing to go to get medical attention, whatnot. So I feel pretty good about what we've designed. We're utilizing our Mercury system as a means of tracking and running reports about where we're at. And we've got contingency plans if we see a spike or a cluster, as some others do with emergency management, about how we might handle the residential population. So I'm feeling pretty good about our process right now.
Great, thanks, Antonio. It does sound like a very thorough process. You may be getting some requests for more consultation there.
Yeah.
Larry, you're unmuted. Did you want to add any comment to that?
I was just going to add, Antonio sparked me, but in addition to the quarantine at home, there is a care team on our campus through our Division of Student Life that is making contacts. So they're using some staff on campus that might not be fully utilized right now. I know we've got some athletic coaches and some people in other departments where there's not a lot of opportunity for them right now. They're literally reaching out to each and every student and their family as they're at home and interacting to make sure that everything is being met and that they're keeping up on their classes and so forth. So we're still keeping those points of contact and service to them.
I did want to add too, because I saw another institution had created the position. When we closed one of our buildings, we moved one of our hall directors, residence life coordinators, into managing our QI process. So having that one focal point in the department has really helped with the different partners across campus, right? So trying to keep our staff, keep them on board, also change some responsibilities has really helped. And I've seen their morale pick up a little bit, right, from doing something differently.
Thanks, Antonio. Yeah, we did something similar or have set that up, and agree with you that to make that someone's focus rather than something in addition to other duties has helped a lot. Alma, I'm going to turn to you. Your institution has established a very, I would say, unique and unprecedented testing protocol. With that, you are, it sounds like you're pretty busy with isolation housing. So tell us more about what you're doing and how it's working.
Sure. So we have a mandatory testing program on campus where all undergraduate students are expected to test twice weekly. Faculty, staff, and graduate students also had that same expectation until this week. We are finding that through, we've done over 250,000 tests. These are saliva tests. Our 5-day average is 1.1% positivity. We are, where was I going with that? So sorry. So we have this mandatory testing, and we are working through the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District. They were actively involved in determining our processes for quarantine and isolation, and we're taking all of our cues from them. We have a campus-wide executive steering committee for our COVID-19 response. So when students are tested, that information is, we are processing the tests on campus in the lab at veterinary medicine. When we receive a positive, that positive is sent to the health center. The health center then sends us, university housing staff, there's only 3 that are allowed access to the information, the individuals who have tested positive, and and then we start the isolation process for students in university housing to be able to start assigning them to spaces in isolation. In that process, we are asking for, they get to choose their meals that they want to be delivered for a 14-day period, a 10-day period for isolation. We have breakfast that, dry breakfast that is delivered in a box with drinks, and then lunch and dinner is delivered directly to the student door. And we have our staff that are then assigning individuals in a contactless isolation process. And our residential life staff are reaching out to those students daily to check on them. And we have a script that has been identified for each day to make sure that they are accessing the resources that they need. They also are contacted by the public health district every day to answer questions about their health. And we have partnered with one of our hospitals who provides some additional resources in the room, a thermometer and some other pieces that they can connect with that resource as well. Our quarantine process is a little, it goes through the CU-PhD through their contact tracers, and so we're reliant on them to let us know when individuals need to be in quarantine, and then we start that same sort of process as well. Our isolation spaces are separate from our quarantine spaces, and once a student has exited either isolation or quarantine, we take 72 hours to clean the space to make sure that it's totally clear of the virus, and then we reuse that space as we move forward. I see a question. County Regional Health communicate with your students, and yes, they communicate with our students daily, if they can, and we go from there. So not only are our housing staff communicating with them, but also our CU PhD staff are communicating with them.
Great, thanks Alma, and thanks for catching that question. Cindy, thanks for submitting that question. So you talked about engaging with students who are in quarantine or isolation. Larry, you talked about, that same effort, that outreach being done, for students who leave campus. Let's talk about student engagement that with the students not necessarily involved with isolation or quarantine housing. There's been a lot shared in the last several months among housing residents, life professionals of different strategies, creative ideas, platforms to use, etc., about engagement. But talk a little bit about what your program in general is doing, maybe what your philosophy is about engagement, and maybe one or two ideas that you find particularly exciting or creative as strategies for engaging your students. Antonio, do you mind taking that first?
Sure, yeah, sure. So we were in the process, right, pre-corona, of launching our residential curriculum. And so we launched a residential curriculum, and everything is virtual right now. And so the engagement for residents who are in the general population or those who might be in quarantine or isolated, who are not, right? So it's doing a lot of virtual gaming, some Netflix operational things. Some of our resident assistants are taking students to the rec center, because now you have by appointment only recreational time. So they sign up for all of that as a time on a floor, and that has been really helpful. The thing that has been most successful is what we had hoped all along, right? Teaching students how to create community for themselves. And the positive success we've seen is throwing students on a floor, a wing, or whatever in a big group meeting, and them coming up with the ideas, taking responsibility for the community. Some of the rules and regulations. So we've seen a little bit of all of that that's happening. It's been really, really positive. So we opened up some more living learning communities this year in a new space. So the learning aspect and students helping to facilitate some of that online social space. But again, as I told our team, students don't come to us needing community. They bring that social community with them to the institution. Part of our role is trying to figure out how do we help continue to facilitate a positive environment for them where everyone has the opportunity to participate. And so we've seen some really good results. We launched yesterday with iClicker Insights from Macmillan Learning surveys to kind of see how students are doing, and the early results from that survey, we're getting literally 24-hour turnaround on them. And students are reporting to us a high sense of belonging to the institution. So in our first couple of weeks of launching this, we're seeing at least that what we had hoped to be successful, it is successful. And, given the money that we spent for it, it is a really good feeling today to say, yes, we're still doing good. And it was well worth the investment, even though we're down a couple $1 million. So that's how things are going here at Houston.
Great. Thank you so much. Alma, do you want to tell us about some ways that you're engaging your students?
Just a few $1 million, right, Antonio?
Just a few.
Yeah. What I can share is that we are really using just online platforms for students to get together. And so our student organizations are still holding virtual meetings. Our students in the hall, we have what we call eye conversations for our RAs to get to know their students and to spend some time. Those are happening virtually if the students don't feel comfortable doing physical distancing on the floor. But as Antonio said, what I'm finding is that we currently are not serving meals. I mean, we're serving meals in our dining halls, but we're not allowing them to dine in. And students are gathering in all of our external spaces, our outside spaces, and really creating community on their own. There's football games and there's Frisbee golf, and there's all kinds of things that are happening. And so we're using the online platforms as much as possible, and I'm sure that there are some that they're using that I'm not even aware of because they're much more technologically savvy than I am. But I would also say that in our first 2 weeks, and we have expanded it now till September 16th, we chose to be very consistent on micro communities and not doing community building for more than 10 people at a time. So we have canceled all of our large programming events so that there can be more one-on-one or 1 to 10 community development that is happening on the floors for safety and security at this particular point in time. When we get through this next week, if you will, I feel confident that we'll start to be able to open that up, but we're not anticipating providing any sort of large group gatherings more than 50 people at the most.
Great. Thank you, Alma. I want to throw this question out so we make sure we get to it. And then Larry, we'll come back and see what you might want to add to the engagement question. This question was submitted by Aretha Milligan at Rhodes College. Did anyone bring back students and place them in cohorts or pods? So almost similarly, you didn't, it sounds like you didn't place them in pods, but you maybe have created opportunities for that. So has anyone done that? And if so, how's it going? Or have you done any variation of that? I'm just going to open it up so any of you who might want to respond.
No pods here for us.
Yeah, not in the concept of an organized smaller grouping than the floor being the pod, if you will.
Surprising answer, though, is, we, given our occupancy level, we were, moving towards as many as de-densifying as possible. But students were requesting more. I want a roommate. And utilizing our roommate agreement and our cleaning agreement to hold each other responsible for how they keep each other safe in their own space. So I have seen that request go up as a request for a roommate, as well as on the other side, I've seen requests go up too to have single space. So it's happening on both ends, right? So yeah.
Antonio, someone posed a question again for you. Oh, if I can find it here. Are you trying to track student-initiated engagements? And if so, how are you doing that?
No, we're not tracking the student-initiated. Again, what I found in this time to lower anxiety of our staff is create spaces of where I'm continuously communicating with them, doing more communication virtually with our RAs and our professional staff. Sometimes just saying the same message over and over again has helped. And when I've asked for that feedback from them, what's happening on your floor? Tell me what's happening with your residents. This is what they're sharing with me. So I'm hearing directly from RAs, we're okay. They're doing their own thing. So we got a building of about 170. They're all planning their own activities. And so it kind of helps too, right? When we took more of the learning focus, the students are developing more of the social for themselves. And it seems to, week 3 seems to be working. So hope for more of that to come.
Larry, is there anything you wanted to add to that conversation about engagement?
Well, in addition to everything that's been said, I'll just say ditto. We also, many campuses did this, but our campus was one of those that put in two very large, I'll call them a circus tent, but an outdoor event tent, if you will, giving a location for people to join in smaller groups exterior of the building. So a number of activities have been taking place in those areas, not only just academic classrooms going out and utilizing them during the day, but students going out in the evenings and rain or any other inclement weather, they can still go out and have a space that they can gather and so forth. Our student activities, much like Alma listed, limited it at 50 with a rubric, anything around that range to say, is this a safe event? We judge that. But our Resident Student Association, RHA is known across the national country, it has done a number of virtual things. What I call the grocery bingo has been very popular. I see students stopping in to claim their laundry detergent or their towel or whatever else they've won in those sorts of events. So we know that students are engaging, as Antonio said, on their own, but we're also giving them some structured activities where they can get together and meet people who might not be in that same group or cluster, if you will, on that particular floor or wing. In our academic classrooms, kind of a branch off on the pod question, because of the size of some of our classrooms and the social distancing requiring, we've gone to a method here at Georgia College, and many other campuses have picked up on this as well, but half on, half off. So because the classroom population is too large to meet in the classroom, they'll go on a 4-day week, they'll go every other day. So they're online one day and they're in class the next day. So in that sense, they're in smaller groups or groupings than the traditional class size.
Great, thank you all. I want to catch a quick question directed here at Alma, and then I'm going to throw another one at all of you here as we start to wind down our hour. But here's the very direct question, Alma. It's from Virginia Koch at University of Central Florida. Mm-hmm. Do the 3 housing folks who are contacted by health services rotate their duties, and is that system sustainable? So I think she's looking for your experience with what's the workload like?
It's not sustainable. And so to be able to give you some context for why we are a little behind in having identified staff that the rest of the folks have done, the beginning of August, we had 104% occupancy. At that same time, our first year students were given access to change their academic calendar through August 14th. We opened for early arrivals on August 16th. So from the 1st of August to the middle of August, we probably processed about 1,500 contract cancellations as students moved to an all online platform and chose to stay at their permanent address. At the same time, we are also trying to figure out, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen with quarantine and isolation, so we hadn't set aside a particular building. We thought that 5% of our occupancy was going to be enough space. And then we had the influx of the cases last week, which was against the model of what our folks had created. So that led to us then deciding that we need to close these 2 low occupancy buildings in order to provide some additional space. In doing that, we're going to reassign one of our senior RAs to be the person in charge of this isolation and quarantine space and doing specific programming. But at the same time, we've also added another layer of individuals who have access to that database, which was just approved at the end of last week. So until we got to that place at the end of last week, it was just those 3 individuals. And one was with the residence halls, one was with our private certified housing properties, and the third person was a backup to be able to assist with our apartment communities. And so we're a little behind in real, I wish we would have planned for that better, but we just didn't know. And at the beginning of August, when you're at 104% occupancy, you don't start talking about taking buildings offline and moving people around in the system, especially when you're trying to de-densify and spread people out equally across the system. So that's kind of why we are at the place we are, but we are responding and making hopefully things better for those 3 people moving forward.
Thanks, Alma. I think those comments just really, really drive home this idea that we are we even in those cases where our programs are up and running and our students are in class, we continue to have to make adjustments and respond to the changing conditions. That's actually such a great example. That swing in your occupancy, we all know what that is like. Well, I think we all know what that's like to try and manage. So thank you for sharing that. As we sort of wind down this hour together, I want to put this question out to each of you as panelists. So this is your opportunity to be the housing guru and the consultant again. I love these reflective questions if you haven't figured that out. So we're all familiar with the if I knew then what I know now as sort of a strategy for thinking about what lessons might have been learned or what might have been of value. What's the one thing that you wish you had known? We'll start with Larry. How about that?
Put me on the spot. I did not anticipate the, how do I put this politely? The emotion that went along with this. There are some that are in a capacity mentally where they can look at it and accept it and go with it, and then there are some that literally just need those support systems of saying it's overload. I can't handle this. And as I mentioned earlier, some of that came via interactions with parents, but in a number of cases, it was also with students. Nobody told anybody they had to go back to school this fall, but that desire that I mentioned earlier to have a traditional educational experience, they went in, I think, thinking everything was quote unquote going to be normal, even in every possible way. We said this will not be business as usual. But I think once they got here and those numbers rose, being prepared for that emotional reaction, I don't know that anybody was totally prepared for that.
Thank you. Antonio, do you want to go next?
I think the one thing I would have in the pivoting, I talked with some friends in tech, and they told me, Antonio, some of the things that you are saying are things that we experience often in the innovation process, right? It's we're trying something and it fails, and the need to quickly pick up from that loss and move on, right? And that was something that, right, and then you add, as Larry said, the emotions that go behind all of that. I just spent this last week planning all of this. Numbers change at 11 a.m. I'm making a pivot at 12. By the end of the day, another change is happening, right? And then you've got to just pull yourself back together to say, I'm back in it, to continue going on with it. And so I think it's just that constant need to change directions with the wind and pull your emotions along with you, right? I wish I had that skill set a little bit sooner. I've developed it now. Now I'm good. And I'm good today. Let's say that I'm good today. But I wish I had known that.
So I would say, as I said kind of at the beginning, we really are operational gurus when it comes to housing assignments and maintaining facilities and those sort of things. We know what it means to have a schedule and a process and a rationale for a process and being able to explain it. I wish that I would have had either myself or members of my staff on the testing committee so that we could have talked about, okay, so if this is what the expectation is, then let's help you understand how much time it will take us from a student perspective to implement what you're thinking. And just a classic example, one of the individuals that is the chair of the committee reached out to our staff member late on Friday and said, we're processing tests until 11 o'clock at night. We expect you to still be processing isolation and quarantine spaces at that time as well. Not feasible. And for one particular reason, we can't ask students to move to another side of campus in the middle of the night from a safety and security perspective, but that's those are insights that we provide that our friends in the academic area don't have that experience. And so I wish that we would have been more involved in the operational to be able to highlight some of those questions so that we could have maybe anticipated some of this before it even got to where we are, and maybe been able to have fewer complaints from students and or parents.
Thank you. Thank you all for responding to that. And, you know, Alma, you talked about turning to a resource about the previous pandemic, right? The 100-year-old pandemic. And I wonder if maybe we should start to capture these kinds of thoughts and ideas and write the next book. You know, I think that what you have all talked about really applies to leadership in many organizations, if not most or all. And I think your insights have really been interesting and so helpful. And this idea of, you know, being able to learn from one another, even though our programs, our institutions are different, that's really where I think you know, the golden ticket is this sharing. So thank you so much, Larry, Antonio, and Alma, for participating today. It was my honor and pleasure to serve as the moderator, and on behalf of the association, we're really grateful for your willingness to give back and to share your thoughts and experiences. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Larry, you're unmuted again. Did you have a last word here?
Just the fact that I forgot to unmute.
Okay, so thank you, and those who attended today and those who will be listening in the future. Thank you so much for your interest in this program. So we wish you all the best.